All right, so this is an interview with Mr. Rodney Figueroa, who's a video game developer and animation veteran. Is that right?
Yep, I've also spent a lot of time in visual effects. I also have experience as executive producer on small indie titles. I've also worked in virtual reality and basically any creative industry that deals with creating, developing, or organizing game developers or game development types.
All right, so for the first thing, I wanted to ask, how did you get your start in the industry? Like, how did you just get started on just in general in the field? Like, what was your first job and all that sort of stuff?
Well, early on, I got started when I was like 16, 17. I was a tester at Sony. I do not recommend it for anyone who doesn't want to take the design track. But I was a tester for a few summers because I needed money and it was something that I was interested in. Um, that didn't necessarily lead me to my first real job. My first real job was at a Sony San Diego working on MLB '09, MLB The Show, the baseball game. And that happened mostly on accident because I was already testing and they were like, hey, do you want to work on MLB? You know, you have your resume and whatnot. And I kept applying and it wasn't as easy as just it wasn't the same as, it's very difficult at Sony's studio to pivot from one role to another. They had me in testing and then, I basically had to go through the entire application process to get hired for baseball. But eventually they looked at my stuff and they're like, yeah, we can have you on baseball. And then that was my first actual games development gig. And I spent about 3 years working at Sony. So it was mostly because I had already known people who were working there. And, I was in good relations with the leads. People already kind of knew who I was. They knew that I was doing good work. And I just happened to be applying to another role that was not part of testing, which is kind of a no-no, but I didn't want to do testing for the rest of my life.
Cool, cool. All right, so that was good. Yeah. Let's see. What's another one? Right. How has technology played a role in just the job you've had, and how has all the changes in technologies over the years impacted the way you've done your job recently and stuff like that? How would you say?
I am very good at staying current. If my career had been frozen with the knowledge that I had back when I started games development, I wouldn't know anything about some of the more advanced concepts that we cover in our class. I wouldn't understand anything beyond basic 3D modeling. Technology keeps changing because we get more and more horsepower, right? That's the best part about games development. We get tons of horsepower. But because we've gotten tons of horsepower, there's been a bigger push, technologically speaking, to be able to do something with it. And so as new programs come out, I continue to go to conferences and I still talk to people who are working in industry at various other places that make said software. The industry gets kind of picky about what wins and what doesn't in terms of software, but the software that wins, I usually make it my business to, if not pay for professional courses. I usually get courses through Noman Workshop or etc. I go to professional seminars, which I pay for, but I stay current on purpose in order to not be irrelevant when something new comes out. So there's a lot of monetary investment, mostly because I'm a working professional, to stay current with stuff that comes out. Because otherwise, if my skills get too old or too sloppy, then there's no way that I can really kind of stay connected to it. And like I said, as monitors, computers, as the technology has gotten better, there's a bigger drive to get people to be familiar with it. And I've always been very good at self-training and just figuring out how to build on top of the knowledge that I already have. Because we're not really doing anything new. We're doing more of what already exists, just differently, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Anything else? What advice would you give to someone who wants to break in the industry today? Would you say?
Um, this is always a tough one because it really depends.
Right.
I usually measure this answer depending on who I'm giving it to, right? If it's somebody who's an aspiring professional who has stuff and has been working on stuff, I usually tell them, keep making stuff, go to the meetups, meet other professionals, get people to recognize you for the good that you do for the local community or local game development community. Keep applying, and eventually it might happen. For people who are new, I usually encourage them to keep focusing on what they're good at. Focus on the thing that they like. Because the worst thing that can happen to anyone who's getting into games development is that if you hate games development, you really shouldn't be doing it. It's not always the thing that people think it's going to be. So that the advice that I generally give people is make games. It doesn't matter if they're not great. Make games, make levels, play around with the stuff that's out there. Stay relevant in the stuff that comes out, because that's going to continue to create interest in the thing that you're doing. And then eventually, you can get good enough to continue your career in maybe games, and maybe sometimes it's not games. That's kind of another thing where sometimes people really, in order to get a gig in games, in my experience, you have to first have the dream. You have to want. You have to want to. And the other part is you have to be able to. A lot of people have the dream. They want. They want to be able to be game developers. They want to make games. But they either don't work on their skills, they don't work on their ability to make games, they don't learn how to program. You don't have to, but you have to learn something, right? You have to learn how to do level design, or maybe focus on making shaders, or you have to learn how to do gameplay scripting. You have to learn something, right? And then you have to apply it. And then some people just don't really want to do that part, but they still want to have the dream. And unfortunately, that's like the worst case scenario, because that doesn't ever really become a job for anyone. But if you have the dream and you have talent, or even if you don't have talent, I was never very talented, but you are good at working in the machine, it's just like any craft. You can get good at making things. And that, predominantly, the ability to make the thing, the ability to make a game chunk or a piece of what a game is supposed to be, that not a lot of people always know how to, is what will get you in faster than just, saying, hey, I want to make games. Because when I was at Objects, it wasn't unusual for people to submit resumes with stuff that was not production ready, right? But they had the dream, right? They really wanted to be at the studio. They really wanted to try. But they didn't really ever improve, right? And it's not necessarily your employer's job to improve you. I hate to say it. You have to kind of self-improve. You have to keep working on those things. And eventually, if the stars line up, then a game job is probably in people's future. You have to be good, and you have to have good timing. The sad thing about the industry, and the last thing I'm going to say here before we move on to the next question, is that it is possible to be very good and still not get hired. I know a lot of people who are better than me. I know a lot of people who are better than me at games development. They just never get the chance. They apply, they have a dream job they want to apply to, that rejects them, it kills their dream. They don't want to do it. They get tired of it after a few years. It's entirely possible to do everything right and still lose and not get that job, right? That's just life in any career, really. But what I usually tell students, or even younger people, it's like, if you have the dream, build things, work on things, give it a few years, and know when it's time to step away if it's not going to work out. Because you can always move those skills to other industries. You can always do something else. You can always move to architecture. You can always move to simulations. You can always move to visual effects. I spent 5 years in visual effects. It doesn't always have to be games if that's not how your career takes you, right? But some people try to force it instead of just kind of accepting that sometimes timing and skill just aren't there.
Yeah. Great. And I guess pretty much the last thing on here is just, is it true that you worked on a version of Shrek at some point? Which I know is true.
When I was at Legend, and my IMDb has, here, I'll bring that up. Let me go. It should come up for you, I think, if I do a screen share. This is my IMDb when I was in visual effects. I hear the Shrek movies. I am not old enough to work on the Shrek movies. Only 35, not in the original Shrek release.
Yeah.
I was still a younger man. But I worked on the digital remasters and the digital conversions that converted the films into a modern Blu-ray format, and people wanted 3D movies at the time, so it was also a studio that did 3D conversion, so we converted the movies into like a physical 3D as well. Or excuse me, a virtual 3D, with the glasses, with these things. Of course, I would have one of these at my desk, right? So I'll just put them on just for funsies. And that was a good chunk of my I was there for 5 years, but that was about 2 or 3 years of my life working on Trek 1, 2, and Trek the Third. So yes, I worked on Trek. I've heard every joke about parfaits, donkeys, Eddie Murphy, dragons, ogres, onions, Cameron Diaz. I literally heard every single joke that ever exists related to Shrek, and I never thought that Shrek would get as popular as it would on the internet, but it did, and so it haunts me to this day. So yes, it is true. I did in fact work on Shrek. I have credits on it, and yeah, that is the thing. That is the thing that is real.
Nice.
That is 100% the truth.
Nice, very nice. Yeah. So, yep. Thank you very much. That's pretty much what I needed, the sort of thing I needed, pretty much. And yeah, thank you very much. That was really a really good. Yeah, I really like the answers you gave. They were really great.
If you have any other questions, by all means, don't hesitate to reach out. I always like talking shop about the industry. I tend to be an industry nihilist. I have other colleagues like my friend Karen Morrison, who's an industry optimist. She doesn't defend the industry, but she's optimistic about its futures.
Yeah.
I don't defend the industry and tend to be more nihilistic about its futures, where I don't necessarily agree that it's going in the correct direction, and it's like a machine that tends to hurt people.
Yeah.
The industry, games in particular, usually expects the right kind of person. I hate to admit that I'm in some cases that person where it's like, I don't necessarily feel anything about the process. It is purely a professional exchange. They want my skills. I want their money. This is a nice place to work.
Yeah.
I think the industry does damage to people who have the dream and then love the idea, love the industry.
Yeah.
Don't love the industry because the industry is incapable of loving you. It's a machine.
Yeah.
It's a machine that turns hope and art into product.
Yeah.
You're making product. So the industry is incapable of loving you, Seth. The industry cannot love you.
Yeah.
And because the industry can't love you, the people who love it, wanting it to love them back, it hurts the most.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
They expect it to be something that it could never be because it is an unfeeling engine of product development. And I think if people realize that, they get in, make their money, get out with all that money, or get in, stay in, and enjoy their careers, they can have long, very fruitful careers. But I think if people conflate it with an industry that's going to love them, they're in for some pain, right?
Yeah.
And that's not fun, right? That's not a good way to have your career.
Yeah. I agree.
Anyways,
yeah.